Hello, in this segment of the course, we're going to start discussing consumer theory, consumer choice, and how we determine the demand curve based on the optimal consumption choices of a consumer given the budget that he faces. So to start off with, when we're thinking about how consumers make choices, what we consider is the level of satisfaction that they derive from consuming a given amount of a good. The way that we think about this is with respect to either total utility or marginal utility. When we think about total utility of the good or service that the consumer is consuming, this is giving us the total level of satisfaction that a consumer gets from consuming a given quantity of the good. Marginal utility, on the other hand, is reflecting the additional utility that we derive from consuming one more unit of the good. So it's showing us the change in total utility for one additional unit of the good that we are consuming. Let's look at an example here. So let's consider the consumption of candy bars. And let's think of your favorite candy bar that you love to eat. Well, the first couple of candy bars that you consume, you're pretty satisfied with that. You might be pretty happy with eating your favorite candy bar. But when you start getting to the 10th, 15th, 20th candy bar that you're consuming, your belly might start to hurt, your teeth might start to hurt from cavities, you might start to have a sugar high, and it just doesn't taste as good as that first or second candy bar. Let's see what that means in terms of total utility and marginal utility. So as you can see here, what we observe is that here is the number of candy bars that a consumer is consuming. And total utility is showing us the total level of satisfaction that the consumer derives from the candy bars that he consumes. So for the first candy bar, he gets 25 units of satisfaction, or 25 utiles. And this continues on, the total utility, or his total level of satisfaction, continues to increase up until the 5th candy bar. After the 5th candy bar, his total utility begins to decline. So in fact, we see that though he gains positive levels of satisfaction for each candy bar that he consumes, that's limited up until the 5th candy bar. After the 5th candy bar, he starts to lose satisfaction. So each additional candy bar gives us less and less satisfaction. So what does that mean in terms of marginal utility? Remember, marginal utility is giving us the change in satisfaction or the additional satisfaction that we get from eating one more candy bar. So in the beginning, when we have 0, 1, or 2 candy bars, our marginal utility is rising. Marginal utility is rising up until the 5th candy bar. So we continue to gain satisfaction up until the 5th candy bar. And after that, as our total utility starts to fall, marginal utility becomes negative. So we end up actually losing satisfaction from each additional candy bar beyond the 5th candy bar that we eat. So what can we observe here? Well, what we see is that marginal utility is going to be positive when total utility is increasing. This is telling us that we see a positive gain in utility when the total amount of utility that we have is increasing. On the other hand, what we observe is that marginal utility is going to be negative when total utility starts to decline. This is what we're observing after the 6th candy bar is consumed. Our additional utility is falling because the total utility that we gain from consuming more candy bars is getting lower and lower. From a graphical perspective, what this means is that as we eat more candy bars, though our satisfaction in total satisfaction is positive, it's going to be increasing up until the 5th candy bar. But then, after the 5th candy bar, we see that we actually end up losing satisfaction, and though still positive, it begins to decline. This transforms into marginal utility in the sense that marginal utility is going to be positive up until the 5th candy bar. And then, after the 5th, we see that we end up having negative utility as total utility declines. So marginal utility, once again, is positive when total utility is increasing, and marginal utility is going to be negative when total utility is falling. Another way to think about this is what we call diminishing marginal utility. So this occurs when marginal utility declines as consumption increases. So what we're seeing is that the first candy bar that we eat, going from 0 to 1, gives us the biggest boost in satisfaction. As we continue to increase our consumption of candy bars, our level of satisfaction gets lower and lower. So we gain less and less utility or less and less satisfaction with each additional candy bar that we consume. That's what we consider diminishing marginal utility. So now what we want to focus on is understanding how do we get to the optimal consumption choice of a consumer. What we want to think about in this scenario is a consumer that has a choice between the consumption of two goods, and he has a given budget. What combination of the two goods should he consume to maximize his level of satisfaction? So the optimal consumption point is going to come at the point where he reaches the highest level of total utility. What we're going to see is that this is going to occur when he's maximizing the total utility or the marginal utility for each dollar that he spends on each of the goods. So let's look at an example to explain this a little bit further. So let's consider the fact that we have a $5 budget to spend on pizza and soda. We see that pizza costs us $2 and soda costs $1 per can. What we want to figure out is, based on this information, what is the optimal combination of pizza and soda that would maximize your level of satisfaction? Let's take a look. So first, what we see is we have the total number of soda consumed and the marginal utility that we derive from that consumption of soda. Then we have the total number of pizza slices consumed and the marginal utility from each additional slice that we purchase. Once again, our budget is $5, pizza costs $2, and soda costs $1. What combination of pizza and soda do we want to consume? Well, let's think first if we spend all of our budget on one of the goods. So let's say we spend all $5 on soda. In that scenario, we can purchase 5 cans of soda. How much utility do we get from that? Well, for the first can of soda, we get a boost in utility of 8 units. Second can of soda gives us 7 units. Third can of soda gives us 6 units. Fourth can gives us 5. And fifth can gives us 4. So we add up the marginal utility that we get from the 5 cans of soda that we consume, and that gives us 30 utiles. Okay. What's our next option? Our next option is that we split our $5 budget between consuming some soda and some pizza. So let's assume that we spend $3 on pizza and $2 on soda. Still have our $5 budget. That tells us that option 2, we consume 3 cans of soda and 1 slice of pizza. So what is our total utility? Well, for the 3 cans of soda, we add up our marginal utility, and that gives us 8 plus 7 plus 6, total utility derived from the 3 cans of soda, and we have to add that to the marginal utility that we derive from 1 additional unit of pizza, going from 0 to 1. That gives us 20 utiles. So when we add up all of the utility that we get from consuming 3 cans of soda and 1 slice of pizza, we end up with 41 utiles, or 41 units of satisfaction. All right, one last choice. So now we're splitting our budget and saying that we're going to spend $4 on pizza and $1 on soda, still keeping with that $5 budget. Okay, so with our third option, we see that we can consume 1 can of soda and 2 pizzas. So what is our total utility? Well, from that 1 can of soda, we gain 8 units of utility in terms of marginal utility. And from the 2 slices of pizza, we gain from the first slice 20 utiles, from the second slice 16 utiles. So we add up marginal utility from the 1 can of soda plus the marginal utility from 1 and 2 slices of pizza, and we get total utility of 44 units. So when we look at our 3 options between consuming various bundles of pizza and soda, the one that gives us the highest level of satisfaction or the highest total utility is going to be 1 can of soda and 2 slices of pizza. So, what can we derive from this? This optimal consumption bundle, we can think about this with respect to the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on the good. So let's take soda first. We consume 1 can of soda that gives us 8 units of utility, or an additional 8 units of utility from that 1 can. The price of soda is $1. So therefore, the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on soda is 8. How much pizza do we consume? We consume 2 slices of pizza. The additional utility that we derive from that second slice of pizza is 16 units. The price of pizza is $2. So we divide 16 divided by 2, marginal utility divided by the price. We get marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on pizza of 8. So what we can observe from this example is that in fact at the optimal consumption point, the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on soda is exactly equal to the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on pizza. Total utility has been maximized with 44 utiles, and this will represent the optimal consumption choice for the consumer. Now, what happens if the price of the good changes? Let's assume that the price of pizza goes down. So what's going to happen then? Well, marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on pizza has now changed. So when that happens, this is going to reflect a new optimal consumption bundle. We need to figure out, is the change in the price going to cause an increase in both goods, or an increase and a decrease in one of the goods, or how is the consumption bundle going to change? So if the price of pizza increases, the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend is lower. Consumers will buy less of that good. If the price of pizza decreases, the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on pizza is higher, and consumers will buy more of the good. Let's refer back to our example to explore this in a little bit greater detail. So now, if we assume that the price of pizza falls to $1, it previously was $2, as you can see, the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend has changed. So what does that mean for our consumption bundles? So once again, here we have our table. So if we spend all of our $5 on soda, we have nothing left over for pizza. We still end up with our 30 utiles, as we did in the first part of our first example. But now, if we want to combine or spend our budget on both pizza and soda, we can spend $3 on soda and $2 on pizza. That's going to give us 3 cans of soda and 2 slices of pizza, yielding 57 utiles, because we're adding up marginal utility from 3 cans of soda, 8, 7, and 6, plus the marginal utility from 2 slices of pizza, 20 and 16, 57 utiles. If we change our consumption bundle to spending $2 on soda, $3 on pizza, we consume 2 cans of soda, 3 slices of pizza. Our total utility is going to be derived from the 2 cans of soda that we consume, so 8 plus 7, plus the 3 slices of pizza, so 20 plus 16 plus 12. total utility of 63 units. If we now consume 1 can of soda and 4 pizzas, then we see our total utility rises to 64 utiles. 1 can of soda gives us an additional 8 units of utility, and 4 slices of pizza gives us total utility of 20 plus 16 plus 12 plus 8, 64 utiles. And our last choice is to spend all of our money on pizza and no soda. So when we add up our utility that we gain from 5 slices of pizza, 20 plus 16 plus 12 plus 8 plus 4, that gives us total utility of 56. So when we compare the total utility of all of the consumption bundles that we have just looked at when the price of pizza changes, what we observe then is that we get the highest utility, highest total utility when we consume 1 can of soda and 4 slices of pizza. This would give us 64 units of total utility. Now, let's think back again to the change in the marginal utility for dollar spent. Once again, what we're seeing is that the price of soda is $1. For that 1 can of soda, we gain 8 units of utility. So marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on soda is 8. Now the price of pizza has fallen to $1. We consume 4 slices of pizza. The utility that we gain from the 4th slice of pizza is 8 units of satisfaction. We divide that by the new price of pizza of $1, and we observe once again that our marginal utility for each dollar that we spend is going to be 8. So now what we see in this example is that even though the price of pizza has changed, what we're seeing is that the marginal utility per dollar spent changes with that price change. But at the optimal consumption point of 1 can of soda and 4 slices of pizza, what we are seeing in fact is that we now have a new optimal consumption bundle. Okay, so let's think about what this means. So we've had when the price of pizza is $2, we consume 2 slices of pizza. When the price of pizza is $1, we consume 4 slices of pizza. Both of these points reflect optimal consumption bundles based on our maximizing of satisfaction of utility. So when we have that, we can now determine the demand curve for pizza. The demand curve for pizza is going to be reflected, remember, in the price of pizza and the quantity that we demand. So when the price of pizza is $1, we consume 4 slices of pizza. When the price of pizza is $2, we consume 2 pizzas. So already, from this demand schedule, we can observe the demand curve. At $2, the demand for pizza is 2 slices. That's derived directly from the optimal consumption point. At $1, the demand for pizza and the amount that we consume is 4 slices. Once again, coming directly from the optimal consumption bundles based on finding the point where the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on soda is equal to the marginal utility for each dollar that we spend on pizza. So what does this tell us? Well, what we observe is that for one consumer, the individual demand curve for a given good, such as pizza, comes directly from the optimal consumption choices that he or she faces. They make those choices based on the combination of goods that would maximize their level of satisfaction. So the demand curve that we see for an individual directly reflects the points that maximize his or her level of satisfaction. The market demand curve, on the other hand, is the sum of all of the individual demand curves of all of the buyers of that good or service. So when we look at the market demand curve in the market for goods and services, we can say that in fact, those points for quantity demanded at each of the price points that we observe come directly from the optimal choices that consumers make based on points that maximize their level of satisfaction. So now we want to think about, well, if the price of pizza changes, what does that mean for our consumption of soda? In our example, we still consumed only 1 can of soda. But if we think about it in a general sense, there are 2 possible effects that can take place. The first is what we call the income effect. And what this tells us is that if the price of good X falls, people's income or budget do not change, but in a way we feel wealthier. The same money that we have in our pockets goes a little bit further now because the price of one of the goods that we are consuming has become lower. So with this same budget, we're able to consume more in general. So we know that for sure we're going to consume more of the good whose price has fallen. But if the income effect dominates, it tells us that in fact we're going to consume more of both goods because we feel wealthier. So in the example that we just saw, if the income effect dominated and was strong, we would anticipate that the consumer would feel wealthier with that $5 that they have budgeted for pizza and soda, and he or she would consume more of both pizza and soda. In the opposite sense, we have the substitution effect that could also dominate. The substitution effect tells us that good Y becomes more expensive in terms of good X when the price of good X falls. So this is in relative terms. When the price of pizza falls, the amount of sodas that we need to give up for that one pizza is going to be lower. So on the other hand, the amount of pizzas that we need to give up to get one soda increases. So in relative terms, what this means is that the relative price of soda in terms of how many pizzas we need to give up for one additional can has gone up, and it's relatively more expensive than it was before. So what that tells us is that when the price of pizza falls, if consumers substitute their consumption, that tells us that they're going to consume more pizza and less soda. Pizza becomes relatively cheaper, and the consumer chooses to buy more pizza but less soda with the same budget. So what we can see is that the optimal consumption bundles and the optimal consumption points can be determined by the level of satisfaction that a consumer derives from consuming 2 goods, for example, pizza and soda. We can definitely understand what happens in terms of pizza when the price of pizza falls. The relationship between the change in the optimal consumption points when the price of pizza is $1 versus when the price of pizza is $2 is going to give us the demand curve for a given consumer. Now, what happens with the other good, soda, is going to depend on the income and the substitution effects. As always, take a look at your textbook for additional reading and supplementary information on the topics that we discussed in this video. And as always, it's great to practice and use the exercises associated with this video to help expand and solidify your understanding and knowledge of what we've discussed in this video. Thanks so much for joining me.